Muito bem, vamos seguir com o fórum, convidando...
So let's continue with our forum for the next panel. The topic is development and diversity. I'd like to invite Luana Ozemela, co-founder of DIMA Consultancy, Carlo Pereira, executive director of a Global Pact, Tayna Leite, manager of the program Win-Win from Women, UN Women, and Maud Chalamet, executive of the Prosperity Fund UK. As commentators, we have Marcia Maia of the Development Agency of Rio Grande do Norte, and José Amarildo Casagrande, president of the Bank of the State of Espírito Santo. Maud Chalamet, you have the floor. Well, thank you all for the invitation. We are going to start with development and diversity. Yesterday, the Brazilian Congress voted the law for salary equality among men and women. It is a first step. It is great, and I hope to see other examples in other countries with this agenda of gender equality in favor of development. But when we talk about diversity, we need to speak about not only gender, but race, LGBT population, and there are several hindrances. Today, we have a very rich panel with people with a lot of experience and expertise in this topic, and I'd like to call them to speak to us with concrete examples as to how we can contribute to inclusion, diversity, and favor of development. You have 10 minutes, each one of you, for your presentations. And so I'd like to call Tayna, representative of the Win-Win program of women, UN Women. Tayna, you have the floor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure being here with you this morning. We're kind of wintry, and it is a pleasure speaking to you about gender equality when we talk about economic empowerment. It is one of the pillars of our work here. And the Maud commented, and I agree, gender equality cannot be limited to equality only between men and women. We see everything as a whole, a perspective of women, and one that has to do with economic empowerment of women should include everyone. And that is our idea. So diversity and plurality has been something so relevant in the last decade towards the materialization of the SDGs of the 2030 agenda, and the UN members are committed to them. More and more, we have evidence that a plural environment, a plural economy of social justice, where men and women, people from all walks of life, all races, and all sex orientations, they are societies that prosper when all are included. It develops, it is a society that develops, and people are happier, ultimately, with economies that are strengthened. And this is something that the UN and governments have understood for a while. And more, the private sector and the financial sector are also coming into that agenda so that society evolves towards a more egalitarian environment. We have a colleague here Carlo from the Global Pact. It is a pleasure being here with all of you. And we do have the WEPs, Women's Empowerment Principles, so that we can support, they help us support the private sector in this path. We have the first principle, which is commitment on the high level. It is very important for us to talk about that. It is important that we are here in a forum with high levels of all organizations committing to diversity and to an agenda that is plural so that we can actually achieve the SDGs in 2030. From the very beginning, which is commitment of high leadership, up to the seventh, which is measuring and publishing the results of this journey, we have a long path and relevant path to follow with private sector agents and with financial institutions. An evolving society needs to talk about the economic empowerment of activities that support our activities and are unpaid. So we are going towards we are in a crisis that shows the relevance of all these activities and the relevance of care for society to be able to be productive.
And also the deep inequality that was already affecting society in Brazil and Latin America when it comes to this positioning of care activities. So women lost jobs with schools being closed down, and so we've had an increase in female unemployment and increased income inequality between men and women, which was something that was improving, but now we have this threat, overhanging threat. And even more importantly, we have the private sector commitment to work together alongside us to tackle this problem. At the win-win, the ganha-ganha, which is financed by the European Union, we focus precisely on economic empowerment through capacity building and facilitation of access to business and networking for women entrepreneurs and leaders, and also working with companies. We do this a lot with our colleagues from the Global Pact, and we are ready to support them and accelerate the reaching of targets, and also working and thinking of innovative financing mechanisms and access to credit for women with participation of the financial industry and market. It's very important because we know that women today have less access to credit, even though they're better payers. They have less access to capital. Only 3% of venture capital is in the hands of women globally. It's a scenario that is not beneficial to anyone. It doesn't help economies to develop. We need innovative and agile solutions to overcome the current crisis all around the world, whether it's the health crisis or the economic crisis. And at UN Women, we believe that women will not only benefit from these actions and measures, but they are also leaders and drivers of transformation. And so we need to hear women and all their diversity, Black women, women with handicaps, trans women, women with different sexual orientations, and mothers, and which have been absurdly neglected in this crisis. We need to hear women if we want to overcome a crisis that has hit women more strongly, especially those with multiple vulnerabilities. It's what we do at UN Women. with the support of the private sector. We want to increasingly rely on your support and protagonism, because when companies, they take on responsibility actions, not only social responsibility, but towards a prosperous world, we know that we are all going to prosper as well. So no prosperous society, a society cannot be prosperous if it leaves women behind. We cannot leave anyone behind. So thank you. Thank you, Maud. Thank you, Tayna, for your presentation and for your input. It's important for us to remember this ambitious target of the 2030 agenda. And with this as a guiding line, we can reach this objective. And another important point you mentioned, which echoes many of the development agencies that are hearing us and participating in the ABDE system, is the issue of microcredit as an appropriate financial service aimed at catering to the needs of women. I believe that many agencies will be able to tell us how important this tool is for the empowerment of women. And you also mentioned the importance of the private sector. So in this sense, I work on the ASG perspective and attracting investors for sustainable projects. So we've seen a shift. Inclusion and diversity was addressed very much from a reputation and marketing point of view, but now we see that it's about innovation and creating new markets, expanding business. And that's good business for companies. I'd like to ask Carlos Pereira to make his contribution as director of the Brazilian network of the Global Pact. I'd like to ask him to tell us how the private sector can contribute to the agenda of diversity towards development. Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, ABDE, for the invitation. It's an important topic when we speak about diversity. Often, when we discuss Brazilian companies or companies in Brazil, we import techniques and methodologies or even positions of companies globally. And the result, very often, we talk about diversity, but we are actually looking at gender diversity. And when we mention gender diversity in Brazil, especially in terms of leaders, we are, in fact, talking about inclusion of white women. That's one point. When we talk about gender diversity, we are focusing on women and white women. So we need to be clear about that. What we've been doing at the Global Compact, the webs, for instance, that's Brazil is the second or third country with signatories, in terms of signatories, and that's very important. These are principles. When we think of gender diversity, we are so that we can evolve on this topic in our companies. And so what we understand at the Global Compact is that we need to go beyond that, and we need to go beyond not only in terms of diversity, the whole range of diversity. We need to think of gender and diversity related to ethnic and racial issues and age and several other minority populations. So we need to consider a much broader range and find tools to include all these populations. So, and what's important, because I know that not everyone not everyone works in this area here, but it's important for us to, when thinking of minority population, it's crazy because we talk about minority or minoritized population, because a minority gives off the notion that it's a minority, a numerical minority. When we talk about women and Black population, these are actually majorities, but they are minoritized populations because they don't have power in their hands. And Luana, I'm sure, and other people will address numbers, but figures. But when we look I'm always talking to CEOs and members of management boards, talking about sustainability and ODS and SDGs and perspectives of the financial market. But today, we still have strong bias regarding or prejudice regarding the discussion itself. And so I'm talking about the discussion itself. And so I'm taking a course with very high level people from different companies that find it extremely difficult to talk about targets or quotas. They are completely against it. We were discussing quotas for women, and they're completely against it. Even the women are against it, which surprises me specifically. Just to give you some figures and show how important the discussion is. You're all aware of the World Economic Forum. Many of you possibly have seen the launch of the last diversity report. So for the first time after many years, there's been a drop in the number of women in leadership positions in companies, possibly because of the pandemic. But anyway, those numbers and the 150 or 200 years, depending on the analysis, for achieving effective equity. This period has increased. The number of years necessary to achieve this has increased, and so we need to think of targets or even quotas.
Well, how are quotas being discussed in the world? If we get the 5 largest countries with more women in leadership positions, and in Brazil, women in more councils, out of these 5, and 3 have quotas, and 2 have targets established by the stock exchange. This is what we're talking about. I come from companies, and we have a mind. The mind, for example, is very much formatted for gap analysis. Whatever type, we establish our to be, we have our vis, and we have our action plans to reach that scenario. And I ask myself, in ESG, sustainability topic, diversity, why do we need to work differently? Why do we work differently? This is what I'd like to bring to the table. Yes, there is a cultural issue. This is essential because if it is not internalized in culture, even if we progress, there may be a setback in the future. So it is very important to internalize. It needs to go up to the top. The leadership needs to incorporate this topic, and obviously all tools and tools that we need to have at hand to eliminate unconscious biases, etc. But tools are there. Tayna could talk to you about that for ages, and our other participants here in this panel too. We could talk about the tools for hours for companies to be able to include minoritized groups. So this is not what is lacking. What lacks is intentionality, establishing targets. And I am saying all this because this is something that the Global Compact is doing at the global level. We are following this path, and all topics, not only diversity, but related to environment and social and governance issues. We are going to make this provocation for institutions to have targets. The World Sustainable Council for Sustainable Development is also being represented here by CEBEDS in Brazil, and they did that. They have 6 targets for all the 200 and something signatories, and they need to reach these targets until 2030 or by 2030. The Global Compact is also following this path. So talking about diversity specifically, we have 2 programs. Both in Brazil, we have 2. One is called equity, and equity is priority, and equity is priority gender. So companies need to choose 1 or 2 targets, or 30% of women in leadership positions by 2030. And another target. Some people have questions. Oh, but women are arriving. There has been a long time. For a long time, they were marginalized inside companies. Well, information that made me very surprised is that women are majority in universities in Brazil since the 90s. So for 30 years, we have had women being graduated in college in Brazil. So in the Global Compact, we have team that is predominantly white. So we hired a consultancy to help us, and we are addressing this situation now. Even though we have been working with this for quite a while, we understood that we were not going to be able to do that alone. So we hired a consultancy to help us. We humbly did that. So we have 56% of the Brazilian population is Black, and in leadership positions, we're talking about 4.7%. And this gap is unacceptable. When we talk about trainees, or we have a certain balance, but when we talk about leadership positions, this is it. And when we look at Black women, and a number that I have in mind, we are talking about 0.4%. And we have at least 25% of the population in Brazil are Black women. Maybe I can be helped by my colleague Luana with these numbers, but it is an amazing gap. It is an unacceptable gap. And the financial market has a lot of strength. So JP Morgan does not include companies that has no diversity of at least 2 people in the boards. Yesterday, I saw the Bank of America having a trainee program specific for the Black population. So this is what we need to do, affirmative action. And the numbers are appalling, really. And I was looking at a company the other day. It is with the webs, in the webs with us, world empowerment principles, etc. But when I looked, by chance, the governance part of the company. So I looked at governance, the board and committees, and also the executive directorate. Around 20 people, 20 white men aged 50 to 60 years of age. So I am sorry I apologize for my tone, but these are facts and we need to take action. I was part of the global board of the Global Compact, presided or headed by Mahendra and Popoma, by several people. And the General Secretary asked us directly to promote impact. And he was very clear. That's why the Global Compact started to work towards this with these programs called Global Impact Initiatives. And in the first year, last year, we had 19 countries with 300 companies gathering 1 trillion in revenues and a large amount of staff. In the gender program, we're talking 32 countries. So there is appetite in the market. And why is that? Because, well, I recommend you to read the Larry Fink letters, especially the 4 recent ones, the 4 latest ones. It is quite interesting. In a BlackRock podcast, and we're talking 9 trillion under their management, he says, I don't know. He said, I don't know why people are interested in my letters. I just read society. Well, I know why, but he does read society, and it is what society is requesting. Carl Schwab speaks about the economy of stakeholders for stakeholders, and society is making its demands, and we can do quite a lot. I will conclude, and probably I will have time for questions later.
Thank you, Carlo. And don't apologize for your tone. We do need people like you who really state the facts with numbers as well. I like the fact that you highlighted the diversity and inclusion agenda that needs to be pushed by leadership, and the so-called minoritized population doesn't have power in their hands. And so there is a dichotomy. We need to accelerate real affirmative actions to empower minoritized populations. But while we do see appetite in financial markets, we see some companies, some private companies adapting, but there are still barriers, hurdles, the cultural hurdle and other hurdles for the promotion and acceptance of targets and concrete actions. I'd like to ask Luana for her contributions. She is an expert on inclusion and diversity, and it's important to have your contribution and recommendations in terms of public policies that can help us advance more quickly towards this agenda. Luana. Thank you, Maud. First, I'd like to thank and greet my fellow panelists, Carlo, Tayna, José, Marcia, and thank ABDE for the invitation. I'd like to start by recognizing with full humbleness, I cannot represent the full voice of the Brazilian Black population. Although I am the only Black person on this panel, I cannot claim to represent all Black people in Brazil. So I'm going to talk about my experience in working on international development in the past 40 years. I'd like to start with three aspects that I believe demonstrate that until today, the approach of economic development policies have been limited regarding the Black population and also regarding racial equality. First, we need to recognize that development policies in Brazil and in Latin America have always prioritized survival rather than the thriving of the Black population. Black population have always been confined in the sphere of social policies and completely ignored by fiscal policies, by innovation policies, by financial market development policies. The Black population has been ignored by such policies. And also the assumptions, the assumed roots of racial inequality always related to lack of capacity of Black people rather than market failures, or how to absorb highly qualified, highly skilled Black labor, or even in the provision of public services. And third, the racial identity has never been expressed as an important asset that can influence rising mobility of the Black population through the strengthening of the so-called internal control locus, or the perception that success is determined by the individual or by the environment. And so race has not been taken into account as a relevant element in the process of development, only as a proxy of social disadvantage, historical social disadvantage. In eliminating the role of race and racism as a cause and structuring factor of racial inequality, development policies have eliminated the possibility that racism has a direct impact on the process of development. And we know that it does have this impact. And so the argument here, and what I'd like all of you to leave this session with this in mind, is that sustainable development is not possible without racial equality. Alberto Alesina's study shows that unequal concentration of wealth among racial groups within the same country is what hinders the development of nations the most, because racial inequality leads first to inefficient delivery of public utilities. It disincentivizes the participation of Black population. It increases conflict. It produces discriminatory policies. It weakens democracy and the free market institutions. Most of the population, in the case of Brazil, generally feels that the benefits of capitalism belong to a minority group, the white population. Economic inequality, therefore, among classes, as it is conventionally measured, falls into the trap of meritocracy and is thought of as the result of skills or efforts. But the racial inequality along or over all economic levels entails that being Black is undoubtedly related to a predetermined level of well-being. And so it is not possible to associate racial inequality with the discourse of meritocracy. It would be better to associate it with the injustices of the current economic system, not the differences in capacity between groups. And what can we do to address racial inequalities? We need massive investment and policy reforms to reduce the stock and flow of racial inequalities. And I refer to structural racism and racial inequalities that the markets produce every day, in spite of access to quality university education contributing to increasing incomes. It's the family household assets that determine economic success and intergenerational assets that, and also in the aspirations and expectations, educational aspirations and expectations from childhood. But there is tremendous inequality in access to financial resources. 1.5 million Black employers with university education today, and the proportion of Black employers with university education has increased fivefold in the past 15 years, but it's still half of the proportion of whites. But it's advancing quickly with affirmative actions. Companies led by Black women are increasing more quickly than any other kind of company. The number of Black women employing at least one person, this increased 45% in the past 15 years, compared with a drop of 5% among white men, according to PNAD survey. Almost 45% of companies led by Black people have unmet credit demands, according to IDB report. So this means that there's a triple dividend. It's about job generation, reduction of inequality, formation of social and human capital through the accumulation of assets. And so economic growth with racial equality is undoubtedly fundamental for sustainable development. But what can financial development institutions do? The DFIs, as they are known, they have a crucial role in reducing racial inequalities. They can operate at least at three levels: the macro level, policy level, the macroeconomic policies, the national development plans, mobilization of institutions and stakeholders at the highest economic and political levels of each country.
DFIs can influence the governance of institutions or markets, CVM, B3, central bank, and in the micro level, programs that directly support Black persons and Black companies or localities that are predominantly Black, investing in capital, human resources, etc. DFIs could have at least 5 tools to exercise its influences: non-reimbursable resources, structuring projects, demonstrating feasibility to the market, develop studies such as the GAP study. Why not a racial equality one? And rank companies. Why not? Platforms of indicators. They can also influence in the contracts, in the contract terms of traditional investments. They could provide loans for macro political reforms or investing in traditional market areas, influencing with clauses and terms that benefit Black persons. So when private and public institutions have a commitment in the SDGs, they need to realize that the targets related to reducing inequality are the most powerful ones, as they have the largest number of connection with other targets. That is, reducing inequality leverages the development potential because it accelerates other SDG targets, not only those related to equality or gender and race equality. So it is a priority at the world level to have the investments, but it is crucial. Our company, DIMA Consult, has headquarters in Qatar, and our mission is to eliminate these inequalities through structuring capital, thematic funds, incorporating the perspective of race in governance structures of large corporations, and structuring projects and policies that are specific to the area. So I'd like to invite you all to get in touch with me, those who would like to develop more ideas and to collaborate in this to this effect. Thank you all. Thank you, Luana, for your presentation and contributions. There is something that you said that brought me large impact. The Black population was confined to a state of survival. This has huge impact. Thank you also for pointing out the virtuous cycle brought about by reducing inequality in new targets and to accelerate growth. Thank you very much. With this, we finish the first part of our panel, and I encourage our participants to ask questions in the chat so that we can send them to our speakers. I'd like to invite to the second part of our panel the director of Banestes, José Amarildo. Banestes is an institution of the Brazilian development system working with microcredit with very concrete results of in the area of empowering women. So please share with us these advancements. You have 4 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Maud. Thank you all. Thank you for the invitation. Microcredit for us at Banestes is in our DNA. We have worked with microcredit for over 18 years. We have had over 825 billion reals in loans, and 50% of this value was loaned to women. So women represent over 50% of this value that was made available to the microcredit market. We see microcredit as an important tool for inclusion and social development. We see that people who are part of this segment and people are guided and they receive guidance, and we need to combine a program of state level at the state level with our loans, and this facilitates the entry of people. to have access to this credit, because sometimes financial institutions do not consider or see this public. And we have small municipalities participating, and they know better their public. We go there, we visit their enterprise, we provide guidance regarding finance. And at the end of 2020, the state government, together with Banestes and the development agency, launched the project Crescemos Junto, with specific credit lines for women. And in 2020, with this pandemic that hit the whole world, we loaned 103 million reais, and with the same amount or percentage of women loaning. 50% of this credit goes to entrepreneur women. Something also important is that we are always looking for new actions. We are looking for organizations, for a new program, for a new line, so that we also achieve segments in the peripheries of large cities. There's no point just the bank thinking. I need to have people who understand the needs of these communities. So the bank needs this guidance from these people so that the loans are better tailored to these communities, so that we find out the best strategy, the best line, and how are we going to provide guidance for these people who will take credit, so that this will actually bring development to these people, so that people grow and they can invest in their businesses and they can work as entrepreneurs. We don't have a target for microcredit. Banks like targets, but we don't have that, because when we have the target, quite a lot can be inadequate. So what we have today is the whole bank engaged in offering this credit line. In 1 year, we had over 103 million reais in microcredit. Without targets, we do cater for people who need this credit and who can and want to have this credit. So microcredit is a very important line, and inside Banestes it has a priority, and we would like to improve it even further. Unfortunately, my time is over, but this is our experience, and it is great. It is very good, and we are very proud of it, and we are very proud of speaking about it. Thank you. Thank you, Amarildo, for your experience, for presenting your experience with this productive microcredit that comes with the guidance. And also for talking about the partnership, working in partnership with organizations. This is very important in order to better cater for the needs. Now I give the floor to Marcia, Director of the Agency of Rio Grande do Norte. You have 4 minutes.
Good morning. I'd like to thank ABDE for the invitation. I'd like to greet Tayna, Luana, Carlo, José Amarildo, and Mode as well. I'll try in 4 minutes, very short time, I will try to say that the AGN is a financial institution that seeks democratization of credit access. We've been working strongly towards the economic empowerment of women, youths, and communities, quilombola communities in Rio Grande do Norte. I'd like to give two examples, two cases of success cases that we chose for this presentation in cities in the interior of Rio Grande do Norte. I'm currently in Caicó, a city in the Seridó region where women, they produce wonderful embroidery work. And also the city of Bom Jesus is not far from the capital, but it's a city where we have two communities and two success cases. The first is a rural community with a leader called Cícera Franca, a woman who is today president of the cooperative of Cotegi. She is also president of the Rural Workers Trade Union. She is also a member of the FETRAF, Family Farmers, and she's a leader in her community, and she achieved a historical milestone in her community with access to microcredit. The strongest program is the microcredit program. Similar to Banestes with José Amarildo, we have a program that is very strong to support small entrepreneurs, small businesses in Rio Grande do Norte. And with a bonus that allows our clients, most of whom are women. We have 60% of businesses are led by women in our portfolio. And Cícera was able to purchase a motto cultivator. It was a historical milestone to access credit without bureaucracy. And this motto cultivator changed the history of production of vegetables that she has in her locality. And so they used to employ manual tools. It took the whole day. It was very tiring. But with a motto cultivator, this machine, and I was there, I visited her, in a few minutes to an hour, they can do the work that used to take a whole day in preparing the soil. So they have been celebrating this, and so they sell their vegetables at the open market and at the Family Farming Supply Central. So we work with credit geared towards economic empowerment of women. And we have a second success case in the Grossos community, Quilombola settlement, where men work on the production of manioc and maize. The women work on the processing of manioc, and they produce cakes and breads and biscuits. And with the credit that they accessed, they were able to purchase machines, equipment, industrial equipment, bread maker, and other tools. And they were able to double their production in this Quilombola community in Bom Jesus. So 30%, we have a law here in Rio Grande do Norte, 30% of everything that is purchased by the government needs to be from family farming. And we have a central for family farming supply. And we also have a program for youth empowerment. I'm sorry, it's so little time, but I have a challenge for all of us during this pandemic, a big challenge. I am the first woman directing the Development Agency of Rio Grande do Norte, and I will not rest until we provide credit to women who are victims of domestic violence. This is a challenge in my management. In order to access microcredit, the spouse needs to sign the contract. How are we going to free these women from economic dependence on their aggressors if we cannot, well, if this would require the signature of a spouse. So that's a big challenge. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marcia. Thank you for sharing these success cases. It's very good for us to celebrate and reinforce the importance of the work of regional development agencies, because they are able to reach these remote populations. You mentioned quilombolas and women who are victims of violence, domestic violence. Thank you for your contributions, and count on us in your initiative to provide credit to women victims of domestic violence. And so we need to conclude our panel. I'd like to open the possibility of some final remarks, very quick, brief final remarks, a comment just to conclude. Tayna, please. Tayna. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy. Here we are here at UN Women, very excited and moved with so many people together with us on this journey. We increasingly see that gender equality is being expanded to encompass all the diversity that needs to be considered, as mentioned by Luana and Carlo, and also the concrete actions that are beginning to echo. This revitalizes us to continue on this journey, which is often solitary and arid. It's good to see we are not alone. And so I'd like to thank you also, because it was very good to hear and learn as well. Thank you. Yes, it's true. We need to re-energize and share success cases so that we can be stronger on our journey. Carlo. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to participate. The Global Compact is at your service. We have several companies, and on any point of the journey, when we talk about diversity, sustainability in general, it's a journey. It's a journey towards a movable objective. And so we are at your service to support you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Carlo. Luana. Luana, what your final remarks, please, for us here in Brazil, from Qatar, for us here in Brazil. I'm very optimistic. In spite of all the difficulties that we face, because there's a lot to be done, and we have people, Black people, who are highly skilled and with capacity to contribute to the intellectual construction of policies, interventions, and there's a Brazilian Association of Black Researchers. There's a national network of Black economists. There's REAFRO, the national network of Black entrepreneurs. So our country has a wealth of skilled Black people. This can be done through the banks and through public institutions as well, but we need to recognize that we cannot be subject to political cycles, which is what's been happening in the past few years. That's why private institutions and corporations need to embrace this topic. If the World Economic Forum is able to launch an initiative towards racial equality, placing with a clear goal of fighting structural racism. And so I hope that the recent declarations of companies will materialize in the form of concrete actions. And so one thing that I hope will happen as a result of all these announcements is that institutions will bring about a new set of economic research, more sophisticated research, and effective solutions for a truly sustainable future will be built with the contribution of Black people. Thank you.
With these optimistic words, we're going to conclude, and we're going to go together with development banks, public policy, with the public sector in this journey towards greater diversity and the benefit of development. Thank you all for the invitation and all of your participation, and we are now going to go to the next panel. Thank you.